Most people still believe welding the doors shut was the moment I lost my mind. But the truth is that everything important had already happened long before anyone picked up a camera. That was the thought running through my head as I stood inside my repair shop, watching a silver Mercedes sitting silently beneath the overhead lights while sheriff's deputies, insurance investigators, and two attorneys examined every corner of the building. The vehicle looked perfectly ordinary except for one detail that had already spread across half the county through photographs posted online before anyone understood the full story. Across the service bay stood Victoria Langford wearing a brightly colored designer blazer, oversized jewelry sparkling beneath the fluorescent lights, and oversized sunglasses resting on top of her carefully styled hair, even though we were indoors. She folded her arms with complete confidence, speaking quietly with her attorney as though she already knew how the entire situation would end. Looking at the Mercedes, most people assumed that was where the story began. They were wrong. It had actually started 3 days earlier with something far less dramatic and much more expensive. My name is Logan Carter, and I own a family-operated automotive repair shop just outside a growing residential community in western Colorado. My father opened the business more than 30 years ago with 2 service bays, 1 toolbox, and a simple philosophy that every customer deserved honest work completed the right way the first time. When he retired, I expanded the shop, added diagnostic equipment, hired additional technicians, and built a reputation that kept our schedule full almost every week of the year. Contractors depended on us to keep their work trucks moving. Teachers trusted us with family vehicles. Local delivery companies relied on our maintenance schedule because unexpected breakdowns cost them money every hour a vehicle remained off the road. In our business, consistency mattered more than advertising. One missed day affected dozens of people. Most mornings followed exactly the same routine. I unlocked the front office before sunrise, started fresh coffee, reviewed repair orders, and walked through every service bay before the first customer arrived. That Monday morning should have been no different. Instead, I turned into my parking lot just after 6 o'clock and immediately noticed a luxury sport utility vehicle parked sideways across the entrance to the main service doors. There was enough space for pedestrians to pass, but not enough room for a pickup truck or customer vehicle to enter the building. At first, I assumed someone had experienced a mechanical failure during the night. Then the driver's door opened, and a woman stepped onto the pavement with calm confidence, adjusting the sleeve of a colorful designer blazer before smiling as though nothing unusual had happened. "Good morning," she said pleasantly. "I am Victoria Langford, president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association." I introduced myself, expecting an apology followed by a request for assistance moving the vehicle. Instead, she explained that the association intended to discuss what she described as repeated violations involving commercial traffic near the neighborhood entrance. I politely pointed out that my repair shop had operated in the same location for decades and that the driveway needed to remain open because customers were already scheduled to arrive within minutes. Victoria listened patiently before glancing toward the building behind me. "Your business creates more neighborhood activity than the community expected," she replied. "Perhaps a short interruption will encourage a productive conversation." I actually laughed because I thought she was making a joke. She was not. Within 15 minutes, the first customer arrived, saw the blocked entrance, and asked whether we were closed. Another delivery driver called after finding no way to unload scheduled parts. My technicians stood beside the service bays waiting for instructions while the morning schedule slowly unraveled. I documented everything instead of arguing. I photographed the vehicle from multiple angles, recorded arrival times, noted delayed appointments, and saved messages from customers who had to reschedule because they could not reach the shop. Years of operating a business had taught me that clear records usually solve problems more effectively than raised voices. Victoria remained nearby, greeting a few neighborhood residents who stopped to ask questions and explaining that the association was simply protecting community standards. Before leaving that morning, she looked back toward me and smiled with complete certainty. "I believe we have made our position perfectly clear," she said. At that moment, I had no idea that the same Mercedes would soon be sitting inside my workshop, becoming the center of a controversy that almost everyone misunderstood before they learned how the previous 72 hours had actually unfolded. After Victoria finally moved the Mercedes later that morning, the parking lot slowly returned to normal, but the damage to the day's schedule had already been done. Two customers had canceled appointments they had booked weeks earlier. A parts delivery arrived nearly an hour behind schedule because the driver chose to wait until the entrance was clear, and one commercial client called to explain that a disabled work truck would have to be taken somewhere else because every lost hour meant another construction crew sitting idle. None of those setbacks seemed to concern Victoria. Before driving away, she handed me a neatly printed packet describing what she called community expectations regarding traffic, commercial appearance, and neighborhood harmony. I thanked her, accepted the papers, and placed them inside my office without making any promises. My priority was getting the shop back on schedule. That afternoon, after the last customer picked up a vehicle, I reviewed the security camera recordings from every angle covering the property. The footage showed exactly what I remembered. The Mercedes had been positioned across the entrance before sunrise, remained there while customers struggled to enter, and was only moved after repeated delays had already affected the business. I saved multiple copies of the recordings along with photographs, appointment logs, customer messages, and delivery records. Experience had taught me that memories become less reliable over time, while properly preserved records rarely change. The following morning began peacefully enough. Coffee brewed in the office, technicians prepared their workstations, and the first several repairs progressed exactly as planned. Around mid-morning, however, Victoria returned. This time she was not blocking the entrance. Instead, she walked through the customer reception area wearing another brightly colored designer blazer, oversized jewelry catching the light as she greeted everyone with practiced confidence. She politely asked whether I had reviewed the HOA materials she left the previous day. I explained that I had read every page and found no provision giving the association authority over my privately owned repair shop located outside the residential community. She smiled without appearing offended. "Sometimes cooperation is more important than technical boundaries," she replied. I answered that cooperation always worked best when both sides respected one another's property and businesses. Our conversation remained calm, but neither of us changed positions. Before leaving, she mentioned that the association would continue monitoring activity near the neighborhood entrance because residents expected high standards. That sentence stayed with me long after she drove away. Over the next 2 days, small interruptions began appearing with surprising consistency. Delivery drivers reported being questioned while entering the commercial access road. A towing company mentioned that someone had suggested using another repair facility closer to town. One customer even asked whether rumors about possible restrictions on the business were true. None of those events independently proved anything, but together they created a pattern that I could not ignore. Rather than reacting emotionally, I expanded the security camera coverage around the property, documented every unusual interaction, and instructed my employees to remain professional regardless of who visited the shop. I also contacted my attorney, not because I wanted immediate legal action, but because I preferred understanding my rights before circumstances became more complicated. He advised me to continue operating normally, preserve every relevant record, and avoid unnecessary confrontation. That approach matched my own instincts perfectly. Thursday afternoon brought another unexpected development. A longtime customer named Harold Benson arrived to pick up his restored pickup truck and quietly mentioned that several neighborhood residents had recently attended an HOA meeting where commercial traffic near my shop was discussed extensively. Harold lived inside Willow Creek Estates, but had trusted my family with every vehicle he owned for nearly 20 years. He emphasized that many residents appreciated the shop and had no desire to create conflict. According to him, most simply assumed the association was handling routine community matters. That conversation confirmed something I had already suspected. Whatever was happening extended beyond one unusual encounter in my parking lot. It had become a broader effort built upon assumptions that many people accepted without knowing the full picture. As the workday ended, I locked the office, walked through the quiet service bays, and looked around the building my father had spent decades establishing. Every lift, every toolbox, and every service bay represented years of honest work and customer trust. I had no intention of allowing misunderstandings to define the future of the business. At that moment, I still believed patience, documentation, and common sense would be enough to resolve everything. I had absolutely no idea that before another 48 hours passed, Victoria's own Mercedes would unexpectedly become the center of a situation that neither of us could have predicted. Friday morning started better than the rest of the week. Every service bay was occupied, technicians moved efficiently from one repair to the next, and the waiting area filled with customers drinking coffee while reviewing estimates. For the first time since Victoria's visit, the shop felt normal again. That changed shortly after 10 o'clock when one of my technicians walked into the office carrying a clipboard with a puzzled expression. He told me a silver Mercedes sport utility vehicle had just been dropped off in front of the main service entrance without an appointment. I stepped outside expecting a routine customer who simply needed help. Instead, I immediately recognized the vehicle. It belonged to Victoria Langford. The driver who delivered it was a commercial towing contractor I had never worked with before. He handed me an envelope addressed to Logan Carter, explained that he had only been hired to transport the vehicle, and drove away before I could ask additional questions. Inside the envelope was a brief note requesting that the Mercedes receive an immediate mechanical inspection because, according to the message, it had developed an unusual warning light after recent driving. There was no signature, but the vehicle registration attached to the paperwork clearly listed Victoria as the owner. I looked around the parking lot expecting her to appear at any moment. She did not. My service manager checked the appointment schedule twice to make sure we had not somehow missed a reservation. Nothing had been booked under her name. We attempted to call the telephone number listed with the registration, but the call went directly to voicemail. Because the vehicle had been left in front of the active service entrance, we needed to move it before the next scheduled customer arrived. Following our normal shop procedures, I documented the vehicle's condition with photographs, recorded the mileage displayed on the dashboard, and had one technician carefully move it inside an empty service bay until we could reach the owner. Everything was handled exactly the same way we treated any unattended customer vehicle delivered without prior notice. Less than 20 minutes later, my office phone rang. It was Victoria. She sounded calm and surprisingly pleasant. She apologized for not arriving with the vehicle, explaining that an unexpected meeting had delayed her schedule. She asked whether we could simply keep the Mercedes inside until she arrived later that afternoon, because she preferred not to leave it outside the commercial lot. I agreed, explaining that the shop would perform no work without written authorization and that the vehicle would remain securely parked inside. She thanked me and ended the call. The situation seemed ordinary enough, but something continued bothering me throughout the day. Victoria had spent an entire week emphasizing neighborhood standards, property boundaries, and careful procedures. Now her own vehicle had appeared at my business without an appointment, blocking operations until my staff relocated it. The contrast was difficult to ignore. Rather than reading too much into it, I continued documenting everything exactly as I had done since the first morning she parked across my entrance. Security cameras captured the tow truck's arrival, the vehicle inspection, the relocation inside the building, and every employee who entered the service area afterward. Copies of the phone log confirmed the timing of our conversation. The handwritten delivery paperwork joined the growing file already sitting inside my office cabinet. Late that afternoon, another customer unexpectedly extended repairs on a large pickup truck occupying the only remaining open lift, forcing us to postpone several non-essential inspections until the following morning. Victoria called once again, this time explaining that she would not be able to collect the Mercedes before closing because her meeting had lasted longer than expected. She politely asked whether the vehicle could remain inside overnight for security reasons. I told her that was not a problem because customer vehicles regularly stayed inside the locked building after business hours. She thanked me again, wished everyone a pleasant evening, and promised she would arrive shortly after sunrise the next morning. I locked the shop at 6 o'clock exactly as I always did, completed the nightly security checklist, activated the alarm system, and drove home believing the following day would finally bring an end to one of the strangest weeks my business had ever experienced. I had no idea that by the time the next morning ended, photographs taken inside my workshop would spread across the internet faster than any explanation could possibly keep up. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of quiet rhythm I had been hoping for all week. I unlocked the front office before sunrise, disabled the alarm system, and walked through the service bays exactly as I did every morning. Victoria's Mercedes remained parked where we had left it the evening before, untouched since the security cameras recorded the final inspection before closing. I checked the voicemail expecting a message confirming her arrival time. There was nothing. By 7:30, customers had already begun dropping off vehicles. Technicians were organizing repair orders, and every available parking space outside the building was filling quickly. At 8 o'clock sharp, my phone rang. It was not Victoria. It was one of my regular commercial customers asking whether we could move his fleet maintenance appointment forward because another contractor had canceled unexpectedly. I agreed, knowing that every available service bay would soon be occupied. At 8:15, I called Victoria again. The call went directly to voicemail for the second consecutive day. I left a polite message explaining that we needed instructions regarding the Mercedes because the shop was entering one of its busiest weekends of the month. No reply came. Around 9 o'clock, another unexpected development complicated the situation. A local photographer walked into the reception area asking whether rumors about a disagreement between the repair shop and the homeowners association were true. Apparently, several people had already posted photographs online showing Victoria's Mercedes being delivered to my business the previous afternoon. I declined to discuss private customer matters and asked him to leave. My employees exchanged confused looks, but everyone returned to work without further discussion. Shortly afterward, my attorney called after hearing similar rumors from another business owner. I explained the entire sequence of events from the first blocked entrance through the overnight storage of the vehicle. He reminded me to continue documenting everything and avoid making emotional decisions simply because public attention had increased. Before ending the call, he said something that stayed with me throughout the morning. Do not let someone else write the story before the facts are complete. By 10 o'clock, the service schedule had reached full capacity. Every lift was occupied. Customer vehicles filled nearly every available space inside the building, and technicians carefully coordinated each movement to keep repairs on schedule. Victoria's Mercedes still occupied valuable floor space, while repeated calls continued going unanswered. I reviewed the shop policies once again. Vehicles left without communication beyond agreed pickup times could eventually be moved into long-term storage according to the signed service agreement. But in this case, there was no signed repair authorization at all. The entire situation had become unusually complicated. Just before noon, one of my senior technicians pointed toward the Mercedes and quietly joked that after everything that had happened earlier in the week, the vehicle almost looked like it had become part of the building itself. The comment made several people laugh, easing tension that had been building for days. Looking at the untouched vehicle sitting beneath the overhead lights, I remembered Victoria telling me that temporary inconvenience sometimes encouraged productive conversations. The irony was difficult to ignore. I walked over to the workbench, picked up my welding helmet, and stood silently for several moments before setting it back down. Instead of acting on frustration, I reached for my phone and dictated detailed notes describing the current situation, the unanswered calls, the crowded schedule, and the continuing lack of instructions from the vehicle's owner. I also asked my office manager to send one final written request asking Victoria to contact the shop immediately regarding her vehicle. Only after every step had been carefully documented did I begin considering options for securing the unattended Mercedes while making it unmistakably clear that it could not simply be treated as an abandoned obstacle inside an active commercial workspace. At that moment, I still believed whatever happened next would remain a private disagreement between two adults. I could not possibly have imagined that within a few hours, one photograph taken inside my workshop would travel across social media so quickly that almost everyone would see the image long before anyone heard the explanation. By early afternoon, every practical option had been exhausted. My office manager had called Victoria 3 times, sent 2 written messages, and emailed the address listed on the registration paperwork that accompanied the Mercedes. Every communication simply asked her to contact the shop regarding her unattended vehicle. None received a response. Meanwhile, customers continued arriving. Technicians carefully shuffled vehicles between service bays, and the silver Mercedes remained parked in the middle of valuable workspace that had never been intended for indefinite storage. My attorney called once more after reviewing the timeline I had emailed him. He reminded me that preserving documentation remained far more important than making dramatic decisions. Following his advice, I asked every employee who had interacted with the vehicle to write a brief factual statement describing exactly what they had seen from the moment the tow truck arrived through the repeated attempts to contact the owner. We printed the security camera timestamps, phone records, and copies of every written message. By that point, the file documenting one unattended vehicle had become thicker than many complete repair orders. Shortly afterward, an unexpected call finally came through. It was not Victoria. It was the towing company that had originally delivered the Mercedes. The dispatcher explained that they had received a request asking whether the vehicle could be relocated again later that evening. I asked who had authorized the request. After checking their system, the dispatcher admitted that no written authorization had yet been provided, so nothing had been scheduled. That conversation deepened the mystery even further. Someone appeared to be making plans involving the vehicle without ever contacting the business currently responsible for storing it. Around 3 o'clock, another customer quietly mentioned that photographs of the Mercedes inside my shop were circulating online alongside rumors that I had intentionally refused to return it. That surprised me because only employees, customers inside the building, and a handful of delivery drivers had seen the vehicle since the previous afternoon. I refused every request to comment publicly because I knew a partial explanation would only create more confusion. Facts required complete context, and the stories circulating online contained almost none. Late that afternoon, one of my senior technicians approached me with a practical concern. Several large commercial vehicles were scheduled for Monday morning, and unless the Mercedes was relocated before then, our workflow would become significantly more complicated. We discussed several ordinary storage options, including moving the vehicle to an outdoor secured lot or requesting another tow service. Before making any decision, I reviewed the service paperwork once again. There was still no signed repair authorization, no completed inspection request, and no communication from the registered owner confirming how she wanted the vehicle handled. Everything about the situation remained incomplete. While walking through the fabrication area a few minutes later, my eyes settled briefly on the welding equipment that we normally used for structural repairs, custom brackets, and commercial fabrication work. One of the technicians jokingly remarked that after all the attention surrounding the Mercedes, nobody would mistake it for an ordinary customer vehicle anymore. The comment sparked an unusual idea, not because I intended to damage the vehicle, but because I wanted to create an unmistakable visual message that the car could not simply be abandoned inside an active repair shop, while everyone else carried the consequences. Before doing anything, I called my attorney yet again and described the idea exactly as it had occurred to me. His response was immediate. He advised against any action that could alter someone else's property and reminded me that documentation would always serve me better than symbolism. I listened carefully, thanked him for his honesty, and set the welding helmet back on the workbench. Looking at the Mercedes sitting quietly beneath the lights, I realized that emotions had been building throughout the entire week, but emotions alone were never enough to justify an important decision. Whatever happened next needed to fit the facts just as clearly as every photograph, phone record, security video, and written statement already preserved inside the growing file waiting on my office desk. Early Monday morning, the quiet uncertainty that had surrounded the previous 2 days finally came to an end when 3 vehicles entered the parking lot almost at the same time. The first belonged to Victoria Langford. The second carried her attorney. The third was a marked sheriff's department vehicle responding to what had been described as a civil property dispute rather than a criminal emergency. I greeted everyone outside before unlocking the service entrance and invited them into the office where every photograph, phone record, security recording, written statement, and communication log had already been organized in chronological order. My attorney joined the meeting by video conference within minutes, making it clear that every discussion should remain focused on documented facts instead of assumptions or emotions. Victoria walked into the service bay wearing another brightly colored designer blazer, oversized jewelry catching the overhead lights exactly as it had every other time we met. Her first question was simple. She wanted to know why her vehicle had remained inside the building for so long. Instead of answering immediately, I handed her copies of the written messages, email confirmations, phone logs, and delivery paperwork showing every attempt we had made to contact her after the tow truck left the Mercedes without a scheduled appointment or signed repair authorization. She quietly reviewed the documents while her attorney compared the timestamps with the security footage displayed on a nearby monitor. The deputy listened without interrupting, occasionally asking short questions about the sequence of events rather than anyone's opinions. After nearly 30 minutes of reviewing the records, Victoria acknowledged receiving some of the messages later than expected because an automatic email filter had redirected several notifications, and her assistant had been handling phone calls while she attended meetings outside the county. Although that explained why communication had failed, it did not explain why the vehicle had been delivered to my shop without a confirmed appointment or why no one had followed up before the business reopened on Saturday morning. Her attorney asked whether any work had been performed on the Mercedes. I answered no. The vehicle remained exactly as it had arrived except for the standard intake photographs and the brief movement from the entrance into a secure service bay to keep customer traffic flowing safely. The deputy inspected the vehicle himself, confirming there were no repair orders attached, no completed mechanical work, and no indication that anyone had attempted unauthorized service. Victoria then surprised everyone by asking to review the security recordings from the first morning she had parked across my shop entrance. We watched the footage together from beginning to end. The video showed customer vehicles turning away, delivery trucks waiting outside, technicians standing idle, and my repeated efforts to keep the conversation respectful despite mounting delays. When the recording ended, the room remained quiet for several moments. No one argued about what the cameras showed because the timestamps spoke more clearly than anyone in the room could have. My attorney then explained that our concern extended beyond one unattended Mercedes. The larger issue involved repeated interference with a private business and the measurable financial impact documented through canceled appointments, delayed deliveries, customer statements, and operating records. Victoria looked through those materials more slowly than before, occasionally comparing customer schedules with the surveillance footage. She admitted that she had underestimated how significantly blocking the entrance had affected daily operations. Her attorney suggested that before either side considered further legal action, both parties should exchange complete documentation and attempt formal mediation. The deputy agreed that the matter appeared to involve business losses, property access, and civil questions better addressed through legal counsel than through speculation or public rumors. As the meeting concluded, Victoria authorized the immediate removal of her Mercedes and signed paperwork acknowledging its release from the shop without any repairs having been performed. Watching the vehicle leave the building, I realized how different the real story looked compared with the version already spreading online. People who had only seen a photograph believed they understood everything. In reality, the most important evidence had never been the car itself. It was the complete timeline preserved by careful records, patient documentation, and conversations that finally allowed every event to be viewed in the proper order rather than through a single dramatic image. Over the next several weeks, both legal teams exchanged documents exactly as the deputy had recommended. Instead of arguing through public statements or social media posts, every question was answered with appointment logs, delivery records, security footage, written correspondence, customer schedules, and business records preserved from the first morning Victoria had parked across my entrance. My attorney explained that business disputes are often decided by the quality of documentation rather than the volume of opinions, and that advice proved more valuable every day. An independent mediator was appointed to review the chronology before recommending whether the matter could be resolved without a lengthy court proceeding. During the first mediation session, every major event was placed on a timeline stretching from Victoria's initial visit to the release of her Mercedes. Seeing everything arranged in order immediately changed the tone of the discussion. What had looked like several unrelated disagreements now appeared as one continuous sequence in which each decision created the circumstances for the next. The mediator paid particular attention to the security recordings showing customer vehicles unable to enter the shop, canceled repair appointments, delayed deliveries, and the gradual disruption to normal operations. He also reviewed the complete communication history involving the Mercedes, including the unanswered telephone calls, written messages, email records, and the documented efforts my staff made to contact Victoria before taking any further steps with the unattended vehicle. None of those records had been created after the dispute began. They had all been generated naturally during ordinary business operations, making them especially reliable. Victoria and her attorney presented their own materials, including homeowners association meeting minutes, neighborhood complaints regarding commercial traffic, correspondence between board members, and internal discussions about preserving community standards. Reviewing those files revealed something that surprised nearly everyone in the room. Although residents had expressed concerns about increased traffic near the neighborhood entrance, none of the meeting minutes instructed anyone to interfere with my business or prevent customer access. Instead, the board had generally discussed opening conversations with nearby businesses about possible long-term traffic improvements. The mediator paused at that point and looked toward Victoria. He asked whether parking the Mercedes across the entrance had been formally authorized by the board. She answered honestly that it had not. She explained that she believed a brief interruption would encourage a conversation and admitted she had underestimated the practical impact on a working repair shop. Hearing that admission shifted the discussion considerably because it distinguished official association policy from an individual decision made with poor judgment. My attorney then presented customer statements explaining how missed appointments affected contractors, delivery drivers, and local families who depended upon timely vehicle repairs. Rather than exaggerating losses, every statement described specific scheduling changes supported by invoices, calendars, and repair orders. The mediator commented that the consistency between independent customer records and the shop's internal documentation strengthened the overall reliability of the timeline. Throughout the afternoon, the discussion remained respectful even when opinions differed. No one raised their voice. No one interrupted witnesses. Every disagreement returned to the same question: what could actually be verified? By the end of the session, the mediator summarized the case in remarkably simple terms. He explained that the dispute was no longer about a luxury vehicle or a disagreement between neighbors. It had become a question of business access, reasonable communication, and the consequences that followed when assumptions replaced careful planning. He encouraged both parties to continue negotiating while preparing for the possibility that unresolved financial issues would ultimately require judicial review. As we gathered our files, Victoria quietly approached me outside the conference room. She admitted that seeing the complete timeline assembled from both perspectives had been uncomfortable because it revealed how several small decisions had gradually created a much larger conflict than anyone intended. I told her I appreciated her willingness to review every document instead of dismissing the evidence. Walking back toward my truck that evening, I realized the case had reached an important turning point. For the first time since the entire situation began, everyone involved was discussing the same set of verified facts rather than competing versions of the story, and that shared understanding would shape whatever happened next. Several more weeks passed before the remaining financial questions reached the court for final review, and by then the atmosphere surrounding the dispute had changed completely. The early rumors that had spread through social media had gradually been replaced by documented timelines, verified business records, and testimony from people who had actually been present during the events. The judge opened the proceedings by explaining that the court was not interested in dramatic headlines or incomplete photographs. The responsibility of the court was to evaluate the entire sequence of events from beginning to end using reliable evidence rather than isolated moments taken out of context. My attorney organized the presentation exactly the way we had prepared it during mediation. Security recordings established when the entrance had been blocked. Customer appointment logs demonstrated how the interruption affected scheduled repairs. Delivery records confirmed delays involving commercial suppliers. Telephone logs and written messages documented every attempt we made to contact Victoria after the Mercedes arrived without a confirmed appointment or repair authorization. Every piece of evidence supported the next one, creating a consistent timeline that required very little explanation because the records spoke for themselves. Victoria's attorney acknowledged that the association had no formal policy authorizing anyone to interfere with access to my business, and confirmed that parking the Mercedes across the entrance had been Victoria's own decision rather than an action approved by the board. He also presented evidence showing that once the misunderstanding involving the unattended vehicle became clear, Victoria cooperated with the release process and participated fully in mediation. The court considered that cooperation carefully while also recognizing that it did not erase the measurable business disruption already documented during the earlier stages of the dispute. Several customers testified briefly about canceled appointments, delayed projects, and the practical difficulties created when the entrance remained blocked during normal operating hours. None exaggerated their experiences. Each simply described how the interruption affected work already scheduled weeks in advance. Their statements closely matched the repair orders, invoices, and security recordings already admitted into evidence. The consistency between independent witnesses and business records strengthened the overall credibility of the timeline. After reviewing the complete record, the judge explained that property owners and business operators have the right to reasonable access to their premises and that disagreements over neighborhood concerns should be addressed through lawful communication rather than actions that interfere with ordinary commercial operations. The court further noted that good intentions do not automatically justify decisions that create documented financial consequences for others. Because the evidence clearly established the sequence of events, the court ordered compensation reflecting verified business losses, legal expenses approved under the applicable procedures, and several additional costs directly supported by the record. The ruling also encouraged both parties to establish a formal communication process for any future concerns involving traffic near the neighborhood entrance instead of relying upon informal assumptions or unilateral actions. When the hearing concluded, neither side celebrated. Victoria remained seated for a few quiet moments before gathering her documents. Wearing another brightly colored designer blazer with the oversized jewelry that had become instantly recognizable throughout the case, she approached me outside the courtroom accompanied by her attorney. She acknowledged that the complete timeline had revealed consequences she had never anticipated when she first decided to block the entrance. I thanked her for participating respectfully throughout the legal process and said I hoped future conversations between local businesses and the association would begin with communication instead of confrontation. She agreed without hesitation. During the following days, word of the court's decision spread through the community, but the discussion sounded very different from the rumors that had circulated at the beginning. People talked less about dramatic photographs and far more about the importance of verifying facts before reaching conclusions. Several neighboring business owners contacted me simply to say they had started reviewing their own procedures for documenting unexpected situations. Hearing that made me realize the experience had reached far beyond my repair shop. It had become a reminder that careful records, respectful communication, and patience often carry far greater weight than first impressions, especially when only a small part of the story is visible at the beginning. Several months after the court brought the dispute to a close, life at the repair shop finally settled back into the steady rhythm I had always appreciated. The parking lot filled before sunrise, technicians joked while preparing their toolboxes, familiar customers stopped by with coffee in hand, and delivery trucks arrived exactly where they were supposed to without anyone questioning whether they belonged there. Looking around the shop one quiet morning, I realized that the greatest victory had never been about winning a legal disagreement. It was about protecting the reputation my father spent decades building through patience, honesty, and consistent work. The experience also changed the way I approached every business decision. We upgraded our security camera system, improved customer documentation, introduced digital vehicle intake procedures, and created written communication policies for every unusual situation, no matter how minor it seemed at the time. Some people asked whether those changes were necessary after everything had already been resolved. My answer was always simple. Good records are never created because you expect trouble. They are created because they help everyone understand the truth if questions ever arise. Over time, those improvements benefited both our customers and our employees, making daily operations smoother than they had ever been before. The neighborhood changed as well. The Homeowners Association adopted clearer internal procedures whenever discussions involved neighboring businesses, and future boards required legal review before acting on issues extending beyond association property. Several local business owners later told me they had also updated their own documentation practices after watching how quickly misunderstandings could grow when only fragments of a story became public. Those conversations reminded me that one difficult experience can sometimes encourage positive changes for an entire community. Victoria Langford remained active in neighborhood affairs, although her approach became noticeably more measured. During one community meeting several months later, She openly encouraged residents to verify important information before accepting long-standing assumptions. Hearing those words surprised many people, including me, because they reflected a lesson learned through experience rather than confidence alone. After the meeting ended, she stopped by the repair shop with several board members to discuss practical traffic improvements near the neighborhood entrance. The conversation was respectful, focused entirely on solutions, and lasted less than half an hour. We did not pretend the past had never happened, but we both understood that future cooperation served everyone better than continuing old disagreements. Looking back now, I understand why so many people misunderstood the story in the beginning. A single dramatic photograph traveled across the internet much faster than a complete timeline ever could. Most people saw one moment without seeing the days of documentation, customer records, phone calls, written messages, security footage, and professional conversations that surrounded it. That experience reinforced something I will never forget. The first version of a story is not always the complete version, and patient investigation often reveals details that quick assumptions completely miss. My father used to tell me that trust earns customers, but consistency keeps them. Those words stayed with me throughout every stage of this experience. Long after the legal paperwork was finished and the rumors disappeared, customers continued returning because they knew exactly how our shop operated. We treated every vehicle professionally, documented every unusual situation carefully, and respected every customer regardless of the circumstances. That consistency mattered far more than any headline ever could. Standing outside the shop at sunset one evening, watching another ordinary workday come to an end, I realized that ordinary days are often the greatest reward after an extraordinary challenge. The lifts were quiet, the service bays were clean, and tomorrow's appointments were already waiting on the schedule. That simple routine felt more valuable than ever because it had been protected through patience, preparation, and a commitment to facts instead of assumptions. Before we finish, I would genuinely like to know what you think. After hearing the entire story, which decision do you believe changed the outcome the most? And would you have handled any part of the situation differently? Share your thoughts in the comments because I always enjoy reading different perspectives. And if you enjoy thoughtful stories about property rights, business challenges, and ordinary people solving complicated problems through evidence, professionalism, and common sense, consider subscribing so you do not miss the next story. Thank you for spending your time with me, and I look forward to sharing another story with you soon.